Welcome to Soul Lab Podcast, everyone. My name is Kelly Nazat, and today I'm excited to introduce you to a wonderful friend of mine, Kimberly Daugherty. We're talking in and around the Earth realm about systems, bringing our stuff together, our gifts to humanity to bring out in the world, and all the challenges that we all face in these arenas. And Kimberly, for me, is a wealth of information, whether it's technical, whether it's systems thinking, all the things that help me to get myself together. And as you listen in and talk to Kimberly, you'll find that she is so much fire, so much water, so much air, but she also has that earth element. And so we welcome Kimberly to the podcast.
Wow, thank you.
How's that for an intro?
That's hard to live up to. Okay,
Yeah, right.
where do you want to start
I
today?
like to start the bar very high. Well, so where do we start today? You know, we've already gotten into a bit of the earth realm with the group, and it's already feeling different, right, than the last weeks of water, even the fire stuff. They can feel very kind of alchemically, wow. But this earth section is already starting to feel much more grounded, and there's something positive that's coming through this. There's something so nurturing about being held by this earth element. So, I would like just to kind of get a. You can introduce yourself if you like. Your some of your interests, some of the things that you think are key to the earth element that we'll probably get deeply into during this conversation.
hmm Well, I think when I think of Earth, I think, and my personal experiences, oh man, it really, I keep being drawn back to this memory as a child of laying on the floor and reading the whole Earth catalog and just like looking at everything that was out there that I didn't know and just being fascinated by just how much um, knowledge the human family has amassed and how much that knowledge has changed. I say that in retrospect because half the books that were in the Whole Earth catalog are now obsolete because we have new paradigms and new interests and new ways of looking at things and new models. But those models all sit on some very archaic structures. Number one, human socialization, and that's
Mm,
really where the earth cycles start in for me. And I think my first major move from the childhood structures that I was raised in, that are kind of the background of everything, was when I went to Burning Man. It was the first time that I was in the term is a temporary autonomous zone, but it's basically where the imaginal is key and the intellectual is put on the back burner for for some for some time. And what that allows people to do is to have fun and explore and uh, live out their what if scenarios in group around other people and not just in their fantasies, and to see what would this look like, in 2 weeks on in this virtually indestructible but also uninhabitable, long-term, sustainably not sustainable place. You get to try things out because you probably won't do a whole lot of damage out there. And that's really different from being in human structures and human societies normally that have generations of knowledge behind them and um, a codified ethics of some sort or lack thereof, and the structures of power. I think that it was the first time that I was in a place where we were inventing the structures of power. Um, and that to me is key in how I have looked at social structures from there on out. Because I mean, we all in school and social studies, I'm probably dating myself by even calling it social studies, but in learning about other societies in the world as children, we're taught, there's these structures of government and blah, 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 that are all different, and they all have their pluses and minuses. Burning Man was the first time I was ever in a non-democracy, non-oligarchy, non-corporate imperialistic time. I mean, like, because there's no advertising out there. Like, there's nobody telling you what to think about out there. You're kind of on your own, or directly interfacing with the people around you. And in that way, it acts a lot more like an eco village that's kind of off grid. It's the off gridness. It's that ability to, like, what would you think about if you didn't have advertising telling you what to think about all the time? Um,
So, what about the Burning Man that process and experience that, if we use the sort of elemental idea, what about it that really fires you up? What does that reflect inside of you that it holds space for?
it holds space for the glue that keeps everything else together. It's kind of weird because in permaculture, you're focused on the design of a given piece of territory. You're working on the gardens and the natural functions and the natural systems, but the actual glue that makes all of that work is the social, it's the legal, it's the financial, it's how you, and by financial I mean like money and trust, and like it really boils down to trust. Like
Mm.
all systems of currency are just systems of trust. That what do you trust to hold value over time? So if you look at it from a trust factor, and I would say legal is like the codification of norms and what's expected to sustain this system, and the social of like how do you treat one another, and who holds the power and who makes the decisions and how are the decisions made. All of those things are the glue that holds any process together. And at Burning Man, you don't have any of the processes because you're actually making those in situ, but you do have all this glue to work with.
I like it. So there's this Burning Man is, I look at the middle of fire and it's all about creativity, right?
To some extent, yes.
I mean,
It's
it's about expression. It's about, when I look at the middle fire, there is this sense of of spontaneity. It's Leo. It's the sun. It's about being on. It's theatrical. It has all of these qualities.
it
Yet,
it is it is on an individual level, and
mm,
yet when you get to the collective level, it's very earth.
yes, yes, that's
So
what I
so
was
it's
going
like
to get at.
people are drawn out to Burning Man for the fire, for what it can teach them as an individual, what how they can express themselves. But when you get down to it, when you get out there, it's a different thing because it's also a working city. And it's a working city without a charter. It had, I mean, there are ethics. There's definitely, there's the 10 principles of Burning Man. But aside from those, like, there's beginning to be, after 25 years, there's beginning to be a list of rules that you need to uphold because, like, you can't drive your own car all over the place anymore. When it first started, you could. But a lot of those have to do with the size. Like, so in the scalability of this, you also get into earth factors. But um, from a city aspect, like, they get to wipe that city every year. It disappears. It's very ephemeral. So for 2 weeks, you get to build a completely new city and get to play in what would the city be like that had 70,000 people in it and acted like this. And you get to see stuff fall apart. You do. Like, stuff will fall apart out there, and you get to test it in a super inhospitable environment. It's like a city lab. Like, we play in a soul lab, but this is like a city lab. And once you get to take some of those things out of the city lab, you get to go apply them in the default world and create, your living lab in the earth realm outside.
So, what are some of the key things that you've learned that come to your mind that would be helpful communities like Soul Lab, or for small communities, because we see ourselves as somewhat almost like a bit of Burning Man, where we're holding space in a certain way, conducting this orchestration of all these other communities coming together. What are some of the things that you could offer insights into, because we're talking from the earth realm? What are, to be able to have that fiery, creative, spiritualized sort of expression, what are some of the things that go into creating such a thing?
How do we create space for other people, and how do we decide who gets that space?
Oh.
Because collectively, like so in the virtual world, I mean, this is the first generation where almost everybody in America, for sure, and in large parts of the world, has an alternative universe to exist in called the digital realm. And the digital realm, in historical perspective, used to be called Kairos. It used
Ah.
to be the land of timelessness. So now we are sitting in a place where we have all the time in the world because, like we're recording this. Everything that I'm saying will be held in digital space until that server no longer serves.
Hmm.
Uh, so our collective memory has gotten much bigger, and our space with which to develop our individuality to some degree has gotten smaller, because of the way that we apportion space in both the physical and the virtual world in just the level of attention. Like the thing about Burning Man that always gets me is like you can't see it all. There's no way. There's just like, I think my biggest learning from Burning Man ever was not that there was one Burning Man going on, but that there were 70,000 Burning Mans going on simultaneously. And
Wow.
everybody was having their own experience. And I
Wow.
took that with me to the outside world. When I left and I went to the default world, I thought about that. I'm like, there's 7 billion worlds going on simultaneously on Earth today. And that's just in the human realm.
So, what are some of the earthy insights in terms of how to hold space for that? It's such a ideal. Like, you want to keep them intact. You want to give them space. You don't
It
want to create some autocracy. And
Right. Well, okay, so that was also the very first place I ever ran into a duocracy. Duocracy, like we had a camp that ran by duocracy, and I love it to this day. Like if I ever had an eco village of my own, where I was the benevolent dictator,
Mhm, mhm.
uh, I would let it become a duocracy.
What's a duocracy?
A duocracy is where the group collectively decides what projects are important. And it says, yes, these are the projects that we would like to see done in our camp or in our world or for our purpose or to our charter. And then various people, they kind of as a group break it down into what needs to happen. And then various people take that on because that's their baby. It's like they become, we used to call them czars. So there were some camp functions that had to be covered, like the kitchen had to have a kitchen czar, the gray water had to have a gray water czar, the ice had to have an ice czar. And those people are respected by the camp in that if they ask you to do something in their realm, you'll find a way to do it. Like it's not a volunteer system. It's not a like sign up for Sunday at 2 kind of thing, because Burning Man is a lot more ephemeral than that. I'll guarantee you, Sunday at 2, you'll be halfway across the playa and having the best conversation of your life if you're not held to this time frame, because Burning Man is timeless. It's also it's digital in that way, in that like if you plan anything out there other than the burn of the man, good luck. Because it's probably not happening A, on time, or B, with who you thought it would, or C, it's just there's so much synchronicity that is happening out there around your plans. I should say in spite of your plans, that you have to learn to roll with the flow of it, with the natural cycle of the event, in a
Hmm.
way that you don't have to. And I mean, in the default world, there's that codification of you'll be at work on time, you'll be on the bus at this time, you'll be watching your TV program at this time, XYZ. So like our time outside of Burning Man is very structured, very,
Yeah.
very structured. or it is demanded by other people in our family or whatever.
Hmm.
Out there, there's a lot of unstructured time. And so if you try and structure that time, all of a sudden you're trying to add Chronos to a Kairos event,
Got it.
if that makes sense.
It does.
Um,
It does.
and so in a duocracy, that's the form of power structure inside of a Kairos event. That's the only way to handle it, is that one person says, yes, there will be ice in all of the ice chests all the time. I'll see to it that that happens. Now, how and when that is dealt with is up to that czar. They don't have necessarily every day at 9 o'clock we're going to go get ice kind of thing, because that's not the way Burning Man runs. It's like, okay, we need ice. We're all good. Okay, so you, and you, can you go help me carry ice? It's like, okay, do we have enough people here to cook dinner now? Is it is it time for everybody to eat? Yeah, sure.
I
So
love
I
it.
mean, it's also where rituals start to emerge. We did start a ritual out there. It was called Lavash O'clock, and it was in the afternoon when everybody needed to take a time out, and we needed to make sure everybody was hydrated and had at least a little nibble because you get so overwhelmed out there. And so we would have a meet back at camp, of and it was called Lavash O'clock, and we would wrap lavash and tamarind, which is a fruit that's used in the Middle East to retain water, and feta cheese and onions into these little like burrito like things. And this sounds, the funny thing is, this only really sounds and tastes great on the desert because your body is craving everything in here. And then once you get off the desert floor and you're back in this like really wet environment, you taste when you're like, yeah, it's okay. But out there, you're like, this is the food of the gods. And bacon in the morning. It was
Ooh,
like
always.
there were two things. It was always bacon in the morning and lavash o'clock somewhere between 4 and 5 in the super heat of the day when you needed everybody to focus on their health, on self care.
And
And
so
really,
this
like,
is
those were the emergent things out of that society. Like, if I had taken all bacon and all lavash o'clock ingredients out there, we probably could have survived pretty well. But those were emergent functions of Earth. Like, this is your nutrition out here. This is what you need in order to survive, and everything else is gravy. And it
it's
was
a
understanding that, because I was coming from, like the food industry, where it was like, oh, we're going to feed you every 3 hours.
right, right.
And you get on the desert floor and like nobody wants to eat. It's like you're doing good to keep people just hydrated out there. Yeah,
So
so I mean, that
context.
that became yeah that became like, what is the nurturing function that we need here? Like, how much nurturing do we need to nurture each other in a physical sense? Yes, we all need to make sure that we're hydrated. We probably need to make sure that we can bathe at least once this week. That would be nice. uh, so the codification of norms took over after a few years, but before that, it was rituals that were necessary to keep us all healthy and happy and functioning together. I think, there there's there's kind of a saying that, dictatorships impose but leadership emerges. I kind
Wow.
of feel like in the in the earth realm, that, um, codification imposes but needs emerge. That, like, we can try and plan for everything that's ever going to happen out here, but that's not what we need to do just to survive. Um,
So there's a certain spontaneity to this sort of Chronos time or Chronos
there's both
experience.
spontaneity and synchronicity. It's the honoring of synchronicity, I think, more than anything out
Aha.
there. That you have to honor the synchronicity that is happening within that world that supports you. Because
And
sometimes Lavash O'Clock doesn't happen at your camp. Sometimes you're halfway across Playa and you'll run across a group of people who are doing the same thing ish. And vice versa. We would invite strangers into our camp at Lavash O'Clock and start feeding them because we felt it was important to the people around us. So it's that kind of like care, um, but also honoring synchronicity at the same time. Because oftentimes the people that would show up in camp at that time were like, we'd have amazing conversations with them,
Oh,
amazing. So yeah, it's like what is the most natural form of communication in a kairos environment and not a chronos environment? Because in chronos you get into hierarchies and who's important and who gets the time and that type of thing, but in a kairos environment it's who did you run into and what might they know, or how might they be of interest to you in that moment. It is spontaneous, but I think I believe more in synchronicity than in spontaneity, because I think spontaneity is just it's a term that the hierarchical world gives to synchronicity.
well, yeah, it sort of strips out the teleological or the intelligence within that
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that
exactly.
that inherent system or the field of wisdom guiding this. And I love
Mm-hmm.
that about Kairos. For many years with Solab, I've always tried to um, introduce some symbolism of the sensibilities of Kairos because it embraces that so much. And I believe that is quite a salve to our Chronos based lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
When you do a vision cry, you're stepping out of Chronos into Kairos. There's no appointments. You're just sitting in a
Exactly.
sacred
Yeah.
circle for
Yeah.
days on end and no sleep and all that other stuff.
Until
So
something happens.
until something happens, and
Mm-hmm.
then that the tuning in, I can recall very clearly my experience in that way. I haven't done Burning Man. It's it being much more of a typified introverted person. I always sold my tickets in exchange for single camping out in the mountains or something.
Mm-hmm.
However, much of that I hear from it is there is some level of regret that I didn't have that experience because there's all I ever hear is, oh my God, there was so much beautiful stuff. You would have loved it. It's totally geared for what you're doing and that sort of thing. So there is this interesting point where I think a lot of us in this type of work, especially, we tend to be a bit more uh, sensitive, a bit more sort of introverted because we're that sensitive, and that there is this sort of, in a certain sense, a shrieking away from the collective, but yet at the same time, as it's been said, there's this need to leave our islands to save our home, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, Kelly, I'm gonna have to go.
okay, do you want to call me
Yeah,
back? Okay,
yeah,
we'll
we'll pick this
pause.
up later. Okay, bye.
All right.